We're joined now by Leslie Moonves, who has been CEO and chairman of CBS since it split off from Viacom back in 2005. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but back then, everyone thought that Viacom was going to be the fast-growing company, and CBS was the traditional company that was going to be sort of the slow-growing, slow but steady company, and Viacom was going to be flying through the roof. In fact, the opposite turned out to be the case. CBS has far outpaced its former sister. The stock is up about 325% since 2005, and really has soared in the years since the financial crisis in particular. And what's been most impressive for me covering CBS as part of my beat at CNBC is that Les has really transitioned the company. It used to be incredibly reliant on advertising. Now it's very diversified with a number of different revenue streams. And while the greater media industry all struggles with concerns about cord cutting, just last week, or maybe it was the week before, Les talked about how CBS actually benefits from cord cutting, which is something you don't really hear anywhere ever these days in Hollywood. So I'm so honored to have Les join us here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be joining you.
So it's been fascinating as a reporter on this beat, watching you transform the company, first in terms of diversifying away from advertising, then with digital. At what point did you realize you really needed to change where your revenue came from?
You know, it started, frankly, when we did split the companies apart, and they were saying, okay, CBS is an old-fashioned company. They have a lot of radio stations. They have a billboard business, and they're in the network television business, which is going to die any minute. So last week, NCIS was watched by 20 million people, as was Big Bang Theory. I don't think we're dying. So at that point in time, and up until about 5 years ago, we were reliant, about 75% of our revenue was advertising. And clearly, as you were watching the stock, anytime there was any crisis in the United States or in Greece or anywhere, our stock would be affected because we were too heavily based on advertising. And people were always worried about the fluctuations. So suddenly we realized a few things that needed to happen. One, we needed to get paid for our signal. So that became retransmission consent, which is going to be about 40% of our revenue. And the third part of it is now content licensing, which is selling our content, producing more of our own content, selling it all over the world and making a lot of money that way. So as a result, our advertising is now down to about 45% of what we do. And it was a realization, if we wanted to keep ahead of the times, that we couldn't rely on advertising, and we would have to be one of the first to put our content everywhere.
Now, speaking of putting content everywhere, when it came to this digital transition, you were taking your own path. Pretty much all the other media companies joined together with Hulu. First, it was just Disney and Fox and NBC Universal, and then Time Warner joined on. But CBS decided not to be part of Hulu. Why not? And explain how you sort of decided to go your own way and how you did that.
Well, Hulu, and he doesn't get enough credit for it, was the idea of Peter Chernin. He was the guy who thought of it at Fox, and we were actually the first ones he called. And we went over for a meeting with Peter, and he laid out what Hulu would be, and it subsequently has become something very different. But the idea was that the four major networks would sort of share their content digitally. I'm a very competitive person, as those of you who know me know. The idea of being partners with the competition sort of bugged me. So I said, wait a minute. So Rupert Murdoch's going to have control of my content, or I'm going to be sharing it with Fox, with Disney, with NBC. And I said, no, we should have our own way of doing it. And fortunately, once again, I was surrounded by a bunch of young, interactive guys from San Francisco who were urging us not to join Hulu. They said, we can go our own way, we can form our own group. And we did that, and as a result, many years later, we have CBS All Access, and once again, it gave us control of the family jewels, which is our content.
And so you take your content direct to consumer with your own apps, which are relatively new. And if you want to share some numbers on how many subscribers,
No, you know what? It's good because we can always hide behind Netflix. We say as soon as they reveal their numbers, we'll tell you. We'll show you ours.
They do share their subscriber numbers every quarter. We get new subscriber numbers.
Yeah, it's only after they reach the 100 million they start talking about
Fair
it.
enough.
All right,
you mentioned those young guys who you had giving you advice. You've been CEO now for so many years. How do you make sure you're always up on the latest thing? How do you make sure you're making the right call with digital and not just doing what the rest of the industry is doing?
I think a CEO's main job, if you have a company of any size, is who you hire and who you listen to. And they really are the cabinet members. And you know, when it comes to this stuff, once again, I had to go through a great education about the internet and digital. I'm still learning every day. I still love meeting with the internet guys, which I do constantly. And obviously, it's a division whose revenues, whose profits are growing every day. You know, I'm surrounded by a great team. I know it sounds like a cliche, but you can't do this job unless you surround yourself with really smart people.
And in particular, do you think it's important to have them outside of Hollywood? You mentioned they're in San Francisco.
You know what? There are some good people in Hollywood, too. I got some good guys here. I got some, you know, our company is divided between LA and New York. News is in New York, sports is in New York, sales is in New York, interactives in San Francisco. So it's a very good mixture of people.
I want to hear more about management and how you work with your team. But I first have to talk about this crazy merger activity that seems to be happening over the past couple of weeks. And you mentioned Rupert Murdoch. About a week ago, there was all this news that Disney was interested in buying Fox. Today, it comes out that now Comcast, NBC Universal's parent company, is also interested in buying Fox, the entertainment assets. And then Verizon's in play. They also are interested. What do you make of all of this?
I don't know. I think we were all shocked by the initial announcement, which was on CNBC, about Murdoch potentially selling some of his content assets. And that sort of surprised me because we all envision Rupert as somebody who was always expanding. He was an empire builder, and he's done it brilliantly. He's one of the most brilliant men in the history of media. So the idea that he was sort of breaking up some of these assets and having discussions with Disney, and there are different versions of who thought up whether Disney approached him or he approached them. And the reports from CNBC that day said, well, the talks had stopped. And no surprise, you know, Brian Roberts stepped in there. So I think what it says is content assets are unbelievably valuable, which I think is good for us. And our stock went up after hours on the rumor of this. And the fact that Disney was after the Fox assets, Comcast was after them, potentially Verizon, and who knows who else, is very interesting. I think Bob Iger has done a brilliant strategy of adding on units to his movie company, and each one of them has been successful. So now they are by far the most successful movie company in the world. And the idea of having the Fox Motion Picture Group obviously would be appealing to him as well as Comcast. So I have to tell you, between that and the Department of Justice stopping the AT&T deal or potentially stopping it, were pretty, you know, mind-boggling events that just happened in the last week or so.
I have so many follow-up questions to ask. But first, back to Rupert Murdoch.
Yes.
Why do you think he is selling? Is it because he's getting squeezed by all the digital competitors?
Oh, I don't think that. I don't think Rupert's ever shied away from a competitor. I honestly don't know what their strategy is, other than to say they want to concentrate on news and sports, which they've put a lot of money into. And obviously Fox News does very well, and they're investing a lot in the Fox sports channels. And it's just a different focus for the company. Whether the Netflix and the Amazons of the world had anything to do with this, who knows? Look, the competitors of today are very different of whether it was just a few short years ago, because now when you have Netflix and Amazon producing the amount of original content that they're doing, they're a true competitor to all the content companies.
And I want to hear more about Netflix and Amazon. But first, which of these buyers do you think would make most sense? If you have to look into your crystal ball.
You know what? I could give you a long rationale why each one makes sense or is a dumb idea. Okay. You know, but look, these are all smart guys. I get why they would all want those assets.
And in terms of the Department of Justice, what do you think is going to happen there? Do you think that they'll approve? I mean, it seems like a lot will in terms of the rest of the deals, will hinge on what happens with the AT&T Time Warner deal.
Well, that's the irony. So 2 days after the Department of Justice says this deal is too big and there's too much concentration in media, most of the major media companies are talking about combining. So it's sort of a contradictory situation we're in right now. Look, I was pretty surprised. I've been surprised a lot these last few weeks that the Department of Justice objected to this deal. It didn't seem like something that they would do, but God only knows what the reasons are for stopping that.
Certainly a fascinating area to watch. Now, what does this all mean for CBS?
You know what? Look, we are a content company. We're smaller than most of these companies we've talked about. We are a controlled company, so the idea of us being sold is less on the table than some of the other people. But I think what it represents is the value of our company. If AT&T put such a high value on Time Warner, which they did and they deserve, and Disney and Comcast are looking at some of the Fox assets, we look at ourselves and saying, you know what, we are basically a pure content company. That's what our strength is. We produce 66 television shows for our various platforms between Showtime and CBS and CW and now CBS All Access. It says the value of a content company is phenomenal.
Does that mean you'd be interested in buying some other content assets if everything is now in play?
Sure. We like content. We like doing content. We like owning it. We like selling it. We like producing it. I mean, that's where I come from. That's what my background is. So being a content company, it's the most fun.
Do you think you're at a disadvantage if you don't have the kind of scale or the vertical integration of some of these larger rivals of yours?
I don't know. It's a question that we ask ourselves a lot because now we're competing against monstrous companies. Disney is 6 times as big as we are. Comcast is 6 times as big as we are. Netflix market cap is huge. Now Amazon, the #1 company in the world, is producing content. We're sort of like an old-fashioned production company. You know, we're a small guy. Eventually, are we going to need to do partnerships with other content companies and distribution companies? The answer is probably yes.
What do you think, watching all of these tech giants get into content, you know, most notably Amazon, and we're hearing a lot about how much Apple's going to spend on content, Facebook's starting to spend on content. What does that all mean for you?
Well, #1, we know how to do it really well. Our success ratio is really good. Netflix is now producing 75 original television series, so they're dwarfing us. Our batting average is better than theirs, but everybody's throwing a lot of money there. You know, when you look at Netflix and say they're spending $8 billion, and Amazon, God knows how much they're going to spend, and the reason they're producing content is for a totally different reason than why we're producing content.
Amazon's producing content to get people to buy products, right? Or to subscribe to Prime to buy products.
To sell bicycles and underwear and probably food, you know? So if you're on Amazon Prime and you're watching a great Amazon show, you're hopefully going to be buying something.
So does it make it very hard to compete with a company which has different goals in terms of what its content is doing?
You know what? It's a very good question. You know what? I guess I view Amazon as a competitor, but it's sort of hard to when we're like a tiny, you know, size compared to them, and what they do is different from what we do. However, when they announce that they're doing, you know, an overall deal with one of our producers, or Netflix steals Shonda Rhimes away from ABC, it's a new world out there. It's a new world out there, but once again, there's a place for us.
And how much do you think of them as potential buyers for your content? In addition, I mean, you get a lot of digital revenue, and now you're going straight to consumer. Do you see pulling back from all of these other places so you can just own that content direct-to-consumer relationship?
Look, Netflix started out, and I think it's been a brilliant road that they've done. They started out buying all of our libraries. You know, we still get hundreds of millions of dollars a year from Netflix. Now, one would argue that we contributed to the success of a competitor, and Netflix's goal may not be the same as ours. However, when you're running a public company, and you're all CFOs, you know what it's like every quarter, and to say, gee, we got $200 million from Netflix this quarter, it really helps me a lot, you know? It's something that it's hard to say, no, I'm not going to take it, I'm going to stay pure. So we still do a lot of business with Netflix. We still produce original content for Netflix. And virtually everybody who's our competitor is also our friend. So that's how I look at Netflix. I think they've done a brilliant job. They started with buying all of our content. Then they began slowly to do their original content. And so when Disney said, you know what, we're starting our own OTT service, or we did the same earlier, suddenly we said, all right, we're not going to, Bob Iger said basically, I'm not going to do as much business with Netflix. Netflix is now prepared. They're doing 75 TV shows and 75 movies. They don't need us as much.
Does that jack up the prices of all the content that you want to buy or license or the deals? I mean, you're competing now with so many different kinds of
We're never going to compete with them. They spend so much money. Showtime was bidding on a half-hour show, and David Nevins called me, and basically the most we had ever paid for a show at Showtime was like $3.5 million for a half hour. And he said, all right, I got to go up to 4 for this half hour. I really want it better. Okay, go to 4. Amazon gave him 7. So I said, we can't compete on that same level. When there's a jump ball, we're never going to win it. We're going to have to continue to develop our own projects ourselves. We're going to have to use our own IP like we did with Star Trek on our own over-the-top service. And that's how we compete.
And which of these companies do you think is going to do the best? Do you think Amazon's going to nail it, or do you think it's going to be Apple's going to come in and do to the entertainment business what they did to the music business?
That's a really tough call to make. Each one of their strategies is very different. Apple is dipping their toe in the water, and for them, that's $1 billion is dipping their toe. It really is. They hired a couple of guys from Sony, and they're doing some product, and here's $1 billion. Go do product. So we're in a fascinating time. It's a great time to be in the business. It is.
Now you mentioned sort of having those conversations with your with the heads of different divisions about how much do you spend, and is it worth it? Is it not worth it? I know you're very close with your COO, who used to be your CFO. How do you manage these tough calls working with your executive team?
The basic rule is, I want to hear your opinions. We have a very vocal group. As you said, I'm extremely close to my COO, who, as you said, is my CFO, was my CFO. He still has that role. And he truly, and I'm not saying this because there are a lot of CFOs in this room, he truly is my partner. We have a mantra, it's not that brilliant, but for every creative decision, there's business consequences. And for every business decision, there's creative consequences. So Joe Ionel is his name, and he started at KPMG, and he worked his way up to be deputy CFO, and then I appointed him CFO, and then he truly is my partner. And on every business decision, he'll look at a show and he'll say, that's way too expensive. And I'll say, screw you, we're going to do the show. We got to do the show. We're in the risk-reward business. But it's amazing how closely we work. He is much closer to day-to-day operations than I am. Fortunately, he's a tough Italian guy from Brooklyn, so he's tougher than I am. So I send him in to say no and change your budget and get your numbers up. But it really is such a phenomenal relationship for me. His financial knowledge, I'm a former actor. I'm a creative guy. So having that sort of financial expertise in the next office is great for me. And
so what do you do when he says no to you?
We argue, we close the door, we yell at each other, and then we make a decision. By the way, the truth of the matter is, and we have never gotten into a real argument. We really haven't.
But it sounds like a real balance between art and science. The creative art, the financial science. How do you explain how you make those decisions? How do you know that a show you need to go above what your set budget was?
He's going to say, fine, you can do this, except we're going to miss our projections. Our quarter, we're going to miss what Wall Street says by 5% in our earnings if you do that. I said, thanks a lot. What am I supposed to do now? But that's part of the decision. It's like, okay, these are the shows I want to do. This is what I want to invest in a new news studio in D.C. All right, this is how it's going to affect the rest of the company. Where are we placing our bets? Where is the financial future? How do we explain it? How do we explain it to the street? How do we explain it to the rest of our shareholders, et cetera, et cetera? So it really is a great balance, and, it really is a risk business, where you have to say, okay, this show is going to cost X amount, but this is what it could mean to us, or buying this company is going to do this for us, and what are the risks and rewards, and that's how we do it.
How involved are you in the content decisions? Because you used to it'd be very hands-on, and then as the company grew, it must be much harder. But when it comes to making calls about shows, how involved are you?
The fall schedule doesn't get on until I approve it. I'm still there at the scheduling meetings. We had a mid-season scheduling meeting today. And, once again, I'm surrounded by great people. I'm probably a little bit less vocal than I used to be, but I pretty much know all our content.
So how do you avoid micromanaging then?
It's a good question. It's, one of the things I've had to deal with through the years. But you know what? I try to be involved. I try to know what's going on in most of our divisions. Some I'm more important to the process than others. But it's really important to have your guys feel like they're making their own decisions, And I try to be what I think of as a really good sounding board. Yet the victories that they have, they should feel like they're their own victories, and I think they do.
Do you feel like the kind of content that you're making now has to be different because of the digital landscape? I know you're making a lot more money from overseas than you used to. Your international revenue is higher. Is that because you're trying to create content that will do better in syndication overseas?
No, you know what? The joy I have is, remember, we have Showtime, which has a certain kind of content. All Access, which has a certain kind of content. The CBS television network, the CW television network, our syndication group, our daytime lineup. We have a small movie company. They're all different kinds of content. So even if you're doing The Young and the Restless, or you're doing Ray Donovan on Showtime, make them all as good as they can be within what they're doing.
Does the next generation of viewers, the millennials who have never paid for cable, the core nevers as they're called, do they want to see something very different? Do they want a different kind of show?
You know what? They do want a different kind of show. They want a show that they can get anytime they want it. They want it in smaller snippets. But we're finding them in the marketplace, and as you said, we have said cord cutters are not our enemy. Nobody's cutting a cord and they're going into the woods and not watching television. Everybody watches CBS. Everybody. Whether you like the NFL, you like Stephen Colbert, you like 60 Minutes, or you like The Big Bang Theory, everybody wants CBS. If you want to get it in a traditional way and pay us $2.50 a sub, that's great. If you want to go to a skinny bundle where you get 40 channels for $40, we're there. Or if you want to get us alone for $5.99 a month, we're there. So no matter how you do it, and as people transfer and go further towards digital and towards over the top, we're going to make more money on that sub.
You mentioned a lot of different options, and that's one thing I always wonder about. Do you, even as a consumer yourself, worry that this is getting too complicated? That consumers have so many choices that they're going to just opt for maybe a skinny bundle because they don't, or they're going to cobble together things and maybe CBS will get left out. It's just there's so many options now.
I have my secretary turn on my television set. I mean, I'm so confused. No, it really is. It's a time of great choices and great confusion. There's a lot of ways to get your content, and people are still figuring out. This is all, remember, Netflix is like 5 years old in their current configuration. Look how important they've become to our society. Our All Access is 2.5 years old. Hulu is a few years old. So we're in an era of great experimentation. Yes, it's confusing, and sometimes people now realize I'm going to pay for Netflix, and I'm going to pay for Hulu, and I'm going to get All Access, and I'm going to get HBO, and suddenly say, wait a minute, I'm paying more than I was paying before in the big bundle. So people are going to have to rationalize what their choices are.
So for you as a CEO, trying to figure out what to do next, you're not just creating the products for next week or even next spring, you're looking years out. How do you make sure that you're really understanding what the consumer is going to want, both in terms of content and distribution for the future? I know you have these smart guys in San Francisco, but for you to understand as the person making the final decision.
Look, data is becoming more and more important, and we're relying on it more and more. But at the end of the day, it has to be a good piece of content. We had an expression called wireless is useless if you're hitless, meaning if you put on crap, I don't care where you put it on, people aren't going to watch it. It's about the quality of the content. And look, I'm making bets. We're using data. We have a lot of smart people. We have a lot of smart research. And at the end of the day, it's got to be good content.
Now, the folks here in the room as CFOs have to think all the time about how to make sure that their companies are driving innovation and also not spending too much money. What are your best practices that you try to implement to make sure that your executives, both on the content side and on the sort of execution and product side, are really being innovative? What do you do to foster that kind of culture?
You know what, we recently we called in all our executive teams, and we said, okay, we're putting together an innovation fund. So we realize, you know, we worry about our quarterly numbers, we worry about where we're going. We have a bunch of money here that we're going to put aside, and we want to hear the best ideas, and they can be as wild or as ambitious as you want them to be. So some divisions came in with rather unpromising ideas, you know, like, come on, guys, you can be a little bit more adventurous at it. Some of them came up with great ideas that were way out there, and we selected 3 different ones that we're going to invest about $50 million in.
That's really interesting. And so how long have you been doing this?
This is about 6 months old.
So do you think it's going to be a project that you'll keep doing? Is it...
No question about it. What we hope to do is not just, guys, bring us ideas and we'll pay for them. We'll invest in new content. We'll invest in new ideas. We'll invest in the future. We do have to worry about our quarterly numbers, but at the same point, Wall Street is expecting us. You know, I remember a few years ago, and I'm sure a lot of you went through it, buying back stock was a really cool thing to do.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.